The information in this video has not been fact-checked. Today, I will debate Ethan on the question of, is transgenderism bad for society? The debate will start with each of us giving a 5-minute opening statement. Then we will have an open dialogue with a hard cap of 60 minutes. And we will close with 5 minutes each for closing statements. Earlier, we debated the question, should abortion be legal? If you are seeing this video, that debate should already be posted on my channel. With that said, I will begin with my opening statement. Psychopathology is the scientific study of mental disorders. To de-psychopathologize is to take something previously classified as a mental disorder and make it no longer considered one. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health, from here on referred to as WPATH, put out a public statement in 2010 urging the de-psychopathologization of gender variance worldwide. While this was horrible news for society, it is good news for me tonight, since it means that my opponents can't say I'm attacking the mentally ill. That is, if they believe WPATH anyway, which they shouldn't, since the idea that gender identities should not be judged as inherently pathological or negative is even more ridiculous than saying that there's nothing pathological or negative about a healthy person identifying as an amputee and wanting their healthy limbs removed. Since at least in the case of that guy, he can actually become an amputee, but no man can become a woman. One of the central tenets of gender ideology is that gender identities are innate, natural, and healthy. They need this to be the case for a few reasons. Number one, it is easier to secure civil rights protections for immutable traits such as race and sex. So if people are inherently trans and that is not a choice, then it would be much easier to argue for a bill like the Equality Act, which would secure protections for males who identify as women to use women's restrooms, locker rooms, and dressing rooms. Number two, if gender identities are unchangeable, then talk therapy aimed at trying to change a person's gender identity to become more congruent with their biological sex would be as unethical as trying to talk a black person into becoming white or a female into becoming a male. Both things that are physically impossible and which would assume that there is something pathological and negative about being black or being a female. Number three, if these identities are not innate and can change with time, then it becomes much more difficult to argue for the ethics of the extreme body modification procedures found in gender medicine. Number four, if gender identities are not innate, then society would have to admit that the surge in children and adolescents identifying as trans and non-binary is an epidemic of a mental disorder that is spreading as a social contagion. It's worth pointing out that the idea that gender identities are innate directly contradicts the idea that gender is fluid. However, as mentioned earlier, I suspect the reason some argue trans identities are innate is for the purpose of securing irreversible treatments and civil rights protections. Now, I do believe that people with gender identities deserve the same rights that I enjoy, which is why I'm a fervent opponent of the Equality Act, since right now, in its absence, every trans-identifying person has the same rights that I have. They have the right to go into the single-sex space that matches their sex. That they lack the option that they want is irrelevant to whether they already have equal rights. Also, to allow people into single-sex spaces on the basis of gender identities is to make such spaces no longer single-sex. So any gains for the rights based on gender identity come at a direct loss for rights based on sex, meaning that this really is a zero-sum game. When met with any criticism, the proponents of gender ideology almost always fall back on the dead daughter or living son narrative, which states that unless people are affirmed in their gender identities, they will kill themselves. One obvious problem with this argument is that if a patient is so mentally unstable that they may kill themselves if not given puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, or surgeries, then it would be hard to argue that they are in the right state of mind to give informed consent. Furthermore, giving children, adolescents, and adults what they want when they threaten to kill themselves is perhaps the most dangerous possible thing any parent, doctor, or member of society could do, since it incentivizes people to threaten to kill themselves or to actually end their lives in order to advance their group's cause. So the proper response when an adolescent says, "Give me a double mastectomy or I'll kill myself," is in fact not to give them the double mastectomy. After all, if you give a 15-year-old a double mastectomy, she might want a phalloplasty next, and then maybe a G-Wagon. And since she will have been trained to use threats of suicide as a battering ram to get her way, her parents will be in for a whirlwind of chaos, much like the surgeons will when anorexic adolescents start threatening to kill themselves to secure liposuction. So put clearly, even if the suicide rates were high, that would not justify these treatments. But the reality is, the dead daughter or living son argument is completely and utter ridiculous. Out of the 15,000 under 18s referred to the Gender Identity Development Service in the UK from 2010 to 2020, only 4 died of suicide. The reality is that the choice is not between a dead daughter and a living son, but between a healthy living daughter who will most likely desist during or after puberty, and a daughter who is a lifelong medical patient, possibly has had her healthy body parts chopped off, and who may even be dead from the very cross-sex hormones that she took, as seems to be the case for one female taking testosterone as revealed in the WPATH files. To wrap up, whatever you want to call this ideology, transgenderism, gender ideology, whatever, it doesn't matter. The reality is that it harms all those who are caught up in it. It harms females by putting men in what were once single-sex spaces, and it harms all of us by normalizing deception and unethical medical practice. All of us will have false beliefs about ourselves at one point or another, and we are all best served when we can rely on those around us to correct our false beliefs, rather than unconditionally affirming them. Where loving correction says, I will sacrifice my temporary comfort for your lifelong well-being, affirming gender identities says, you will sacrifice your lifelong well-being for my temporary comfort. It is for all these reasons and more that transgenderism is harmful to society.
Transgender philosophy is one of the most debated topics, again, in modern history. Understandably confusing for many, it brings valid questions into our understanding of ourselves in terms of how we express ourselves, identify ourselves, and treat each other. Similar to the previous discussion, I'll be focusing on real-life practical effects of Hayden's ideology and why it's a counter to a flourishing society. In this debate, we have to ask ourselves, does transgender ideology work philosophically and practically? The answer to the both is unquestionable yes. However, there must be some form of restrictions on what we define gender as, otherwise the concept of gender would fall into absurdity, i.e. neopronouns or God/God's self. Starting off, I'll communicate exactly what my definitions are. Gender, the internal sense of self relating to the sex you are born with. This can be either male, female, or non-binary. In this discussion, I'll primarily be using male-female as sexes, but please be aware that male-female can also refer to a gender. Sex, the biological reality that someone is born with. This is either male or female. Even though there are abnormalities in some people's sex, i.e. Klinefelter syndrome, the body will still primarily be organized towards either being male or female. So, what's the big question? What is a woman? How do we constitute, what constitutes a biological male for becoming a woman? A woman is an adult human person whose innate sense of self reflects that which we would associate with the female sex. So anyone can just identify as a woman then, right? Of course not. This is an innate sense of self. It's not something you just pick on a random day. Multiple accredited institutions recognize this fact. These institutions include, but absolutely are not limited to, the American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Psychiatric Association, World Medical Association, World Health Organization, British Psychological Society, European Psychiatric Association, German Society for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Psychosomatics, and Psychotherapy. The consensus is clear. Gender dysphoria is real and does real harm to real people. We found that approximately 40% of transgender people have attempted suicide at some point in their life. For obvious reasons, this should raise immediate alarm bells, and we should seek for the best treatment for these people. But what is that treatment? Hayden will say that these people are delusional, and we should refer to them as the gender they were assigned at birth. Both of these are hilariously and blatantly wrong. These people aren't delusional. Transgender women know that they are males who feel born in the wrong body. And that is exactly the case. If trans women were delusional, they would think they could give birth and have female anatomy. This simply doesn't happen. People who say that trans people are delusional are in fact delusional themselves. Lastly, Hayden will argue that these people should be treated according to their biological sex as the best way of treating them. After all, we don't want to affirm their delusions, right? I would invite Hayden to point to a single reputable study that shows that this methodology as being the best way to increase the quality of lives for transgender people. The only problem is that this doesn't exist. In fact, all previous institutions I listed comprise of thousands of experts who specialize in the best way to improve the quality of life for people with gender dysphoria all agree on the opposite. Conversion therapy has never shown to work. In fact, it's quite the opposite. A meta-analysis of 108 studies have consistently shown conversion therapy is a total failure. On the other hand, dozens of studies have shown that gender-affirming care does increase the quality of life of these people. Perhaps Hayden will argue that trans people pose a risk to cisgender people, but then I would ask Hayden to present a study showing this to be the case. Again, no such study exists. We consistently find that trans women are much more likely to be victims of assault rather than perpetrators. The last relevant topics would lie on gender-affirming care for transgender youth and trans women in sports. These are topics where a reasonable disagreement can happen, but I'll discuss this with Hayden individually. If the moral reasons for reducing suffering aren't sufficient enough for you, then we can look at the consequential reasons for this. Transgender people are fully capable of working jobs and being productive members of society. When they are at risk of suicide and self-harm, this impacts their ability to give back to society. Numerous studies have shown causal links of happiness to work productivity. If their quality of life is low, their productivity is likely to follow suit. So even if you don't care about the lives of these trans people, you should care about their ability to contribute to society in ways that help everyone. Arguing against trans rights not only is immoral by means of perpetuating their deaths, but yield an inefficient society, which most would find counterintuitive. The result is clear. In our current reality, transgender rights and support is the best option.
For those watching, the way that we are going to do this 60 minutes is we are going to do 10 minutes where I essentially kind of get to sort of cross-examine Ethan, and then he gets 10 minutes where he gets to do the same back, and we're going to do that 3 times for a total of 60 minutes. We agreed at the start that I would start, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Here's what I want to start out with. I want to start with, you mentioned that a woman, and you can feel free to re-give your definition if you want, by the way, but it sounded like it was someone who has an innate sense of self that identifies with the female sex.
Yeah, it's going to align with that.
Okay. How does a male know what it feels like to be the female sex?
They know that they feel like they're born in the wrong body.
How do they know what the female body would feel like?
They're not necessarily saying that they do, but they know that they feel they're in the wrong body.
Okay, but how can a male know what body he should be in, if not his own? Because all he has experienced is his own.
Yeah, I would argue that the presence of gender dysphoria is going to entail, like, definitionally, this feeling of being like in the wrong body. I don't know how to communicate that in a way that's, I guess, satisfying.
Okay, I just want to clarify. I'm just clarify a couple things for the beginning of the conversation, so we both know where we're at here. It sounds like you've completely accepted the de-psychopathologization then, as I mentioned, that WPATH put forward in 2010, correct? You don't think
Absolutely.
This is a psychopathology. You think it's an innate identity, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that gender is fluid then?
Gender is fluid. So when we say gender, are we talking about the expression of gender? Are we talking about the identity? What specifically?
Mm-hmm. So, like, let's say that we had a trans person here to my left who says is a male but identifies as a woman.
Yeah.
Is gender fluid in the sense that 2 years from now that individual can then identify as non-binary or with their biological sex?
I think that's a possibility, but I don't think that's what we see reflected generally. So, like, it's possible that could happen, but, like, if that person has gender dysphoria and then they find, like, oh, this wasn't the right thing and they need to, like, detransition, yeah, I would accept that.
Okay, so you would accept the gender identity, whatever they identify as then?
I don't know. I wouldn't just say, I think that's a gross
you would accept it if they changed it. You would accept it if they changed it, right?
Yeah, sure. If they have the presence of gender dysphoria, yes.
Okay. Do you think that this is this might get into a long explanation, but do you think that every person who identifies as trans has gender dysphoria?
Today, no.
Okay. Why do you say today no? Like what was the importance of today
I
there?
think that whatever that term is, where, like, people want to be like trans because it's like trendy, trans trenders or whatever. I do think there's a real thing that happens. And usually these are going to be youth who end up growing out of it, right? And that's the thing that happens, yeah.
Okay, I got to cover something there. You said that these are going to be youth who are growing out of it. Well, they're only going to grow out of it if they really go through puberty. Because the truth is, if they are socially transitioned as a child, the odds that they persist in that trans identity are damn near 100%. So if you social transition a kid at like 6, the odds that when they are an adolescent, they will continue to identify as trans, it is damn near 100%. It's like 97%.
Really?
Only like only like 2.5% will desist. And so what's going to happen is they're going to be affirmed in their preferred pronouns. And then when they're like 9 or 11, they're going to go on puberty blockers at Tanner stage 2. And then they're going to go on the cross-sex hormones a couple of years after that. And of the kids who go on puberty blockers, it's about 98% to 100% that will go on to the cross-sex hormones. And so once you start this whole process with these kids, giving them preferred pronouns and socially transitioning them as 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds, the chances that they persist are very low. However, if in contrast, you allow them to go through puberty, so prior to this whole onset of giving the kids the blockers, if you let them go through puberty, most of them would desist during or after puberty. Is there anything that you'd dispute?
So I don't know the statistics on this. I'll grant it. What we see here happening is we have a proper diagnosis of kids who have gender dysphoria, right? So I guess I just want to make sure that we avoid begging the question. And by that, I mean begging the question of like, being trans is inherently bad. So if we have transgender youth who are properly diagnosed as having gender dysphoria, right, then I think that we absolutely should provide whatever medical treatment is necessary. That is, if we are able to have a almost like guarantee of this diagnosis, because this will increase their quality of life. And like I said, being transgender is not an inherently bad thing.
Okay, so there's no issue with that. If a 6-year-old socially transitions, it's basically guaranteed that as an adult or as an adolescent, they're going to continue to persist in that trans identity. That's fine with you because you don't think there's anything psychopathologically wrong with being trans.
Yeah, that sounds like something that would be fine. And if the kid was like, this isn't for me, which we do see happen sometimes, then I think that would come out of it. So it seems like it's just a correct analysis.
Okay. I want you to explain this graph to me. So I'll tell you what it is because I know you probably can't read it from where you're at. This is a graph of children and adolescents who were referred to the UK Gender Identity Development Service. And what it shows is that from 2010 to 2022, the increase in referrals was about 20-fold. So 20 times increase in referrals from 2010 to 2022. Would you agree with me that that's pretty obviously an indication of a social contagion?
I don't know if that would be the answer or if it's going to be something such as, I'm sure you're familiar with like the left-hand study, right?
Where once it becomes not viewed as negative anymore, suddenly people feel okay coming out?
Yeah, you could say something like that. Yeah. So like, is that going to like continue to like exponentially increase? I don't think necessarily, no. I mean, will it? I don't know, but I would argue something probably analogous to that. Okay.
So it's because society changed. Now we're more accepting and therefore people feel okay to come out. And that's why we get the sudden increase.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious how you would account for the significant change in demographics, because historically gender identity disorder is something that affected boys. And now we're seeing it absolutely explode among adolescent girls to where about 68%, I think, of referrals to the UK GIDS clinic were adolescent girls now. So a complete change in the demographics. We also know that adolescent girls were at the center of other social contagions like anorexia, bulimia, and cutting. Wouldn't it be pretty obvious that this is a social contagion just based on that alone?
I mean, we can speculate all we want. I mean, I would probably want like a study that says it, right? I mean, I can speculate all day, but I don't think that's really efficient.
All right. There is a saying in medicine, when you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras. And I think when we apply that to this increase, 20-fold increase in referrals to the UK GIDS clinic, I think the most obvious explanation, which is what sort of that metaphor is trying to do, it's saying opt for the most obvious explanation. The most obvious explanation would be that this is a social contagion that burst, if you'll note, right after the de-psychopathologization happened. Right after these identities started being viewed as non-negative and non-pathological, they were able to be celebrated in the media. And so now people could actually celebrate the trans identities. And so now we see it all over children's books and education and on social media. And so now we get this surge. And so I think it is, when you just take what the most plausible explanation would be, I think it would indicate that it is a social contagion. I've only got about 2 minutes left here. So I want to cover one other thing that you mentioned, which was you frequently reference the multiple organizations that support, I guess what you think is helpful guidelines for the medical care of youth identifying with gender incongruence or gender dysphoria, however you want to call it. So this right here is a graph or a chart, and it shows guidelines citing other guidelines rather than citing actual studies and evidence. Okay, this is what in academia would be called a citation cartel. It starts with WPATH right here. When in 2001, I believe, yes, 2001, it starts with WPATH putting out standards of care number 6. That gets cited by Endocrine Society and their guidelines for care, which then gets cited again by WPATH and their next standards of care version 7. And so what we actually have had happen is guidelines citing guidelines instead of actual evidence to create a false illusion of consensus. Okay, this is from the CAST review. This is one of the studies that came out in the CAST review, which was an independent review commissioned by, I believe it was the UK, that actually looked at gender medicine. And so when you say that we've got all these organizations like the APA that are going along with these guidelines, they're not basing it on evidence. They're basing it on guidelines to manufacture a false consensus. When we look at actual people looking at the evidence, okay, Dr. Gordon Guyot, who's largely considered to be the pioneer of evidence-based medicine, he said, quote, this was in 2023, current American guidelines for managing gender dysphoria in adolescents are untrustworthy. In 2025, he said to Mia Hughes that if she could find somewhere where he called gender-affirming care for minors medically necessary, he would, quote, have to jump off a bridge if you do. And that's the father, the pioneer of evidence-based medicine. And so I would just like to know, is it at all possible in your mind that these organizations have been misguided by other organizations that put out guidelines that might be ideologically motivated?
No, I would say this is extremely unlikely.
It's extremely unlikely. Okay, I'm just curious, what could disconfirm that belief that it's extremely unlikely?
You would have to provide like a meta-analysis showing that gender-affirming care does not increase the quality of life for trans.
So like the CAST review.
Is that a meta-analysis?
That's a systematic review of all the evidence, yes.
I would have to take a look at it, but literally when I look into it, nothing showed that to be the case. And I can
okay, you got your 10 minutes is your time now.
Cool, awesome, thank you. You said that was called the CAST review?
CAST review.
Okay, I'll have to look at that. Okay, so are you familiar with the Cornell study of 51 studies, 93% finding that gender transition, including hormones and surgery, improves the well-being with benefits like reduced depression, anxiety, suicidality, and higher life satisfaction? Are you familiar with that?
Nope, not familiar with it.
Okay, so this is like one of the biggest cited meta-analyses that show that it's that gender-affirming care is a good remedy for transgender people experiencing gender dysphoria. None of those studies found harm either, but that's just one meta-analysis. Are you familiar with the Baker et al. 2021 systematic review in Journal of Endocrine Society? That's the publication.
No. Do you mind if I just ask a clarification question on what you just said, though?
Sure.
It's okay if you don't, because it's your time. But when you said that they didn't find any harm, what is inclusive in the word harm there?
I would say a degradation. I need to look at it exactly on because I just have this from notes. But if there's any like major like things of harm, it would obviously note it. But this is going to be like a decrease in quality of life to some degree. What that is, I don't know.
Okay, you can keep going.
In the Baker et al. Study, reviewed 20 studies on hormone therapy, found consistent association with decreased depression/anxiety symptoms and increased quality of life. So that's another meta-analysis of 20 studies. McKinnon et al. Analyzed 46 studies, this is from 2023, on hormone therapy, and it's the strongest evidence for reductions in depressive symptoms and psychological distress. Any of the things there, I know you gave the one CAST review, but the total meta-analyses that I gave was comprised of 51, 20, and 46 studies. How many comprised of the CAST review?
I'm not sure. I'd have to take a look.
Interesting. Okay. Do you have any other studies that shows that gender-affirming care is detrimental to the quality of life for transgender people?
Yeah, so not off the top of my head, but I would have to object to sort of some of your phrasing on some of those studies. Is it okay if I do that in my response here?
In the response, yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay, so I think one of the problems is a lot of the studies that you're mentioning, it sounds to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like they're basing a lot of this on self-report, which is problematic because someone could self-report that they're less depressed when they get what they want and self-report that they're more depressed when they don't get what they want, right? So if you have a child or an adolescent who wants to have puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and doesn't receive them, and then they self-report that their outcomes were worse, well, that doesn't actually tell us if their outcomes were worse or not. It just tells them that tells us they self-reported that way. And if they know that the studies are being done in order to determine whether giving kids hormones or puberty blockers is helpful, then they actually have an incentive to advance their group's cause by self-reporting, depending on which category they're in, right? So if they're in the category of receiving the hormones, they have an incentive to self-report that it helped them. If they're in the category of not receiving the hormones, then they have an incentive to advance their group's cause to report that not receiving those hormones resulted in a worse outcome for them. So you can't perform blind studies here because someone's going to know if they're going through puberty or not, or whether they're getting the cross-sex hormones.
I know you did a lot of speculation. Do you have any evidence to show that's the case?
To show that's the case?
Yeah.
That people can, okay, I don't think I need a lot of evidence to say if you give a kid what they want, they'll report that they're happier.
Why are you assuming that all of these are children?
Was the study not on adolescents? I thought we were talking about minors receiving gender-affirming care.
I thought we were talking about transgenderism as a whole. That was the debate topic.
No, I thought the studies you were referencing were about adolescents. Maybe I'm mistaken.
No,
maybe I was wrong.
No. They're not all just on adolescents. No.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, even on adults, I've maintained the same thing. You can't perform these blind, right? So, like for example, the surgeries. Someone's going to know if they got a vaginoplasty or not.
Yeah, but the thing that I'm going to say is that you're doing a lot of speculation, and I feel that like if there was validity to this, there would be very easy ways to prove this, and if you can't provide that, then I'm just going to say this is speculatory and dismiss it as such.
Okay, you can say that. Do you want me to address?
I will go in and continue with
go ahead.
other studies and other things. So we also find that transgender people are more likely to be victims of sexual assault. Something I am in support of is having transgender people using the bathroom that they identify with, again, assuming that they have some form of reasonable gender dysphoria. Now, do you have any studies that show that transgender people are a danger to cisgender women in the bathrooms or spaces of privacy?
Nope, just my eyes.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so I have studies that show that transgender people are at risk. So I think that it seems that if we want to mitigate suffering, as I would like to do, then transgender people ought to be able to use the bathroom of their choice. The reason why Hayden doesn't have this study is because it doesn't exist. Transgender people are not a threat to cisgender women.
Just real quick, can I add the studies I do have on that topic, though?
Sure.
Okay, so the studies would be that males predominantly are the ones committing sexual violence, and when they commit sexual violence, they predominantly commit it against women. And so letting males into women's spaces is a really bad idea.
Now, do you have a thing that specifies that these are transgender women doing this? Or
I don't think anyone could
cisgender
even,
men?
Yeah, I don't think anyone could even make a study on that because I just don't think there's enough transgender people in the population to actually get a large sample size on that.
You could absolutely do it because I was expecting you to reference a UK study where I think it was like 25% or something of like transgender women in the prison there were arrested for like sexual crimes. I'm expecting you to pull that out at some point, but if you don't have that one, then I guess I can find it for you. But regardless of that, no, you absolutely can. And if there's not enough like data on it, it just sounds like it's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, my rebuttal to that would basically be we have data that says males predominantly are the committers of sexual violence and their victims are predominantly women. And so letting men in women's spaces is clearly pretty obviously a bad idea. I don't think I need more studies for that. But if you think I do, then I guess you can feel free to think I need that.
Where am I at time? Real quick.
You got, I think, about 3 minutes left.
Oh, wow. Really? Holy shit. Oh, sorry. I apologize.
You're all right. Don't worry.
The next thing I would ask is for when you say that, this is a very short-sighted way of categorizing our subjects. So, for example, we all know that men and women are both human. So, if a man, let's say men commit 50% of all crime, and then women commit, let's just say 0%. Are you saying that if I'm in a room with a woman, that means that there's a 25% chance of me being like violently acted upon because they're both human? Because that's the exact same argument you're using.
That if you're if women commit 0% of crime and you're in a room with a woman, you therefore have a 25% chance of crime?
Let's say 50% of men. Let's assume that we have 50% men, 50% women. 50% of men that we do have commit violent crime. 0% of women commit violent crime. Now, let's say I'm in a room with a woman. Because they're both human, men and women, are you now saying that I have a 25% chance of having a violent crime occur to me? No,
but what you're assuming there, and as far as the comparison you're trying to make, you're assuming that trans women are actually women.
Yeah, and what I'm establishing is that there is a difference between cisgender men and transgender women, which you would agree that difference does exist. Yeah, and then men and women are both humans. That's the comparison I'm making. So I think the question there would be: is there good reason to believe that trans women who are males commit sexual assaults at lower rates than males who are cisgender? That would be the question at hand. Yes. Are transgender women committing sexual assault at
the same rates as males,
such that as like cisgender men? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Because if that study existed, you would pull it out. It doesn't exist.
I know you like straight up. I'm not on my computer right now, and that's not part of like the arguments that I'm going through. So it's just like,
no, I got you. But the thing is, you pulled out the little stat earlier, which, I'm glad you pulled out stats. We should be arguing on stats, but this is just feelings, and that's why I'm saying it's like, if these studies did exist, I would say, oh yeah, this is a real problem, but it's not a problem.
So the women who are uncomfortable sharing the bathroom with men, their feelings are just wrong. They need to look at statistics.
Yeah, I'd say they should get over it.
They should get over it.
Yeah.
I thought you guys were the pro-women party, but maybe not.
I am. That's why I support transgender women, bro.
Who are males. But you got 20 seconds. Do you want to keep going or you want to switch to me?
No, I can give my time.
Okay. All right. Let's get into some questions here. Would it be better for a 9-year-old who identifies as the opposite sex to persist in their trans identity into adulthood or to desist?
It would have to depend on like how it is we are analyzing them, right? So like if this is a child who has gender dysphoria, then yeah, they should continue the transition.
Okay, how can you tell the difference? How can you tell the difference between a child who has gender dysphoria and will persist no matter what throughout the rest of her life and someone who might desist?
Yeah, this is a question for professionals. I believe I know a bit on how they're able to do it, and that's going to be through, long-term, whatever indicators of showing that, like, yeah, this kid probably needs gender-affirming care. I don't know what those indicators are, but like, assuming we have the methodology to detect it.
Suppose the experts, so let's just suppose for a second. I don't know if this is true. I'm pretty confident it is, but suppose the experts said they can't tell. Then would these treatments then not be justified?
If they're saying they can't tell, no, they shouldn't do it if they can't tell.
Okay, so if this is important then, if they cannot tell which children will desist and which will persist, they shouldn't be doing these treatments.
Yes.
Okay, now what if the treatments themselves are not neutral? What if the treatments themselves are actually causing the children to further go down this pipeline of drugs, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and continue to persist in the identity?
If they were to do that, I would ask for a study or something that proves that.
Okay, what if the study is that basically every single child who's socially transitioned at like age 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 will continue to persist? That would seem to suggest that either, like you said earlier, either A, these gender doctors are just getting it right every single time, or B, the interventions are not neutral, and the interventions are actually what are trapping these kids in what, in my view, should be a psychopathology.
Yeah, I think what you said would have to be true. Either A, they're getting it right, or B, the medical treatment is, I guess you could see like perpetuating it. But if that were the case, I would need to see something that proves it. But I would argue it seems to be the case that we're just getting it right.
We're just getting it right like 100% of the time?
Yeah, like it's like 99% of the time. And if we weren't just getting it right 99% of the time, or the alternative was true, I think there would be a study or something that you could point to other than pure speculation.
No, but it's not pure speculation. If basically every single person who's socially transitioned goes on to puberty blockers, and then basically every single one of them goes on to cross-sex hormones, I think it's far crazier to assume that we're just getting it right every time than to assume that these interventions themselves are not neutral.
I would need like an actual like.
Okay. That's fine. That's fine. All right.
Yeah.
One thing I want to go into is you mentioned harm. So in the studies you were mentioning, the word harm was used, that like there wasn't harms to these interventions, but that's absolutely insane to me. Would you agree with me that a child who goes on puberty blockers may lose their fertility as a result?
No, I would not agree with that. It's going on puberty blockers followed with cross-sex hormones.
Okay, so I've got WPATH's Standards of Care version 8 right here. This is their latest standards of care put out in 2022. Here's what they say in their Appendix D, summary criteria for hormonal and surgical treatments for adults and adolescents. Puberty blocking agents, informed of the reproductive effects, including the potential loss of fertility and the available options to preserve fertility. And they also have that listed for cross-sex hormones as well. So we're talking about 9-year-old girls who are going on puberty blockers with the possibility of losing their fertility. You're okay with that?
It sounds like, in what you just said, are you telling me it is not the case that it's just puberty blockers, because everything I've ever researched has only pointed to it being puberty blockers plus cross-sex hormones. Are you 100 billion% on what
I'm saying if you look at WPATH standards of care, I got it right here, version 8, latest version 2022. They list on puberty blocking agents. Okay, they've got a section on puberty blocking agents and a section on cross-sex hormones right here. Okay, the puberty blocking agents, they list informed of the reproductive effects, including the potential loss of fertility and the available options to preserve fertility. Another thing that's interesting here, that same section, they say, quote, demonstrates the emotional and cognitive maturity required to provide informed consent/assent for the treatment. Now, if it's the case that, which it is based on the standards of care, that puberty blockers can result in the loss of fertility, there's no way in hell that a 9-year-old girl can have the emotional and cognitive maturity to provide informed consent for that.
Yeah. So what percentage is that? Because there's always health risks with any type of medication that we take.
Okay, so this will be helpful for you then. Marcy Bowers, the president of WPATH, said in a Zoom call that of the adolescent males truly blocked at Tanner stage 2, who go on to cross-sex hormones, which is basically every single child who goes on puberty blockers also goes on to cross-sex hormones. Of them, the amount who could successfully achieve orgasm was really about 0. And so these kids are infertile.
Once they go on the cross-sex hormones?
Which is basically all of them.
Well, you said kids, but once they're on the cross-sex hormones, correct me if I'm wrong, like what's the age for that?
The age for that? So it'll vary a little bit, but it would, from my understanding, it'd be about like a year-ish, year, 18 months, maybe 24 months after the puberty blockers. So for girls, that could be as early as like 11. For boys, that could be as early as like 13.
Cross-sex hormones at that age is something I wouldn't agree with.
You wouldn't want kids taking those cross-sex hormones that early?
No, I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay, what age?
Probably not. At what age? When you start having effects that are, one, statistically very likely, right? And I don't think with the cross-sex, with the puberty blockers alone, I don't think there's like statistical, like very like certainty or anything of like infertility. With cross-sex hormones, there's unquestionable permanent changes that happen as a result of that. That's something that should happen. Either like right at like the age of 17, when you know like definitively like there's been like years and years of like gender dysphoria or adulthood.
Okay, do you know why the kids who would get the puberty blockers, you know why they go on the cross-sex hormones in about like a year, 18 months, 24 months?
So they can have the gender that they can have the puberty that aligns with the gender ID that they have in their head.
Maybe, but the point I'm making here is if they don't, they can't stay on the puberty blockers because they'll get osteoporosis. And so they have to actually get on the cross-sex hormones or they have to get off the puberty blockers. And basically every single child says, I'm going to go on the cross-sex hormones. And so when you give the kid puberty blockers, it's never just puberty blockers. It's always the cross-sex hormones too. And I will point out, WPATH standards of care point out fertility loss on the puberty blockers. It's not just if it's puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, it's on just the puberty blockers too.
What are the odds of osteoporosis?
Of osteoporosis? That's why they're putting them on the cross-sex hormones.
Yeah,
because if they don't, they have to pull them off the puberty blockers.
Yeah, what are the, first off, if it wasn't working for them, then they would just stop taking it like altogether, obviously. Like, it's not like these kids are being like held against their will, like, oh, hey, you have to take these puberty blockers or else, right?
Except they kind of are. Except they kind of are.
Do you have an example?
Yes, because imagine you are an 11-year-old who for the last 5 years of your life has told every single person around you to respect your trans identity. The social cost of then coming out and saying you were wrong is so immense that there kind of is a gun being held to their head, isn't there?
I mean, wouldn't they just like take their own lives? And what I'm wondering is like, can you like demonstrate this happening, like at all?
Demonstrate.
I mean, we can speculate all day. What you just said.
What I just said, that the social cost would be immense.
Yeah, can you give like examples, like substantially, of kids who were like, oh my God, yeah, like I had my childhood taken away from me because of my, transgender affirming parents.
Detransitioners.
Yeah, and that's like 1% of the.
No, but you're working into my hand here. The thing is, in order for someone to admit regret, there's such an immense cost there that's not really what we should be looking at, because the concept of the Oedipus trap is basically you've made a decision so drastic that to admit you were wrong would be so psychologically damaging you can't bring yourself to do it. And with these kids who have sacrificed their fertility and sacrificed body parts with extreme body modification surgeries like penile preserving vaginoplasties, the cost of admitting you were wrong is so great that it's hard to imagine how anyone could bring themselves to do it.
First off, when it comes to the vaginoplasties, that only happens with people who are excuse me. Excuse me, it's still dying. That only happens with people who are not minors. That's
not true. WPATH Standards of Care version 8, you can look this up right now. WPATH Standards of Care version 8 removed age restrictions for the surgeries.
I have a
and I can point you to the WPATH files where a doctor in messages from their internal message forum said that he has performed more than 10, I believe it's either vaginoplasties or phalloplasties on minors. That's an admission from the gender doctors themselves. They're doing this on minors.
So you said WPATH removed.
WPATH removed age restrictions in their latest Standards of Care version 8 in 2022 for the surgeries. Maybe not for all surgeries, but for some of them, I know that for sure.
Like, what kind are we talking about here? Because if I see something that's like, okay, this is something like, I hear something, I need to fact check this.
Mm-hmm. You can look it up. WPATH Standards, just look up WPATH Standards of Care version 8 removed age restrictions for surgeries.
Mm.
It's true.
Excuse me. Yeah, a leaked draft proposed.
No, I'm
looking at some drafts right now. The final public eliminate these specific for most procedures. The changes have been controversial. The state said it makes no recommendation on specific ages for any treatment, including surgery, emphasizing individuals.
Yeah, and if you don't believe that, I can pull up the WPATH files and literally show you a written admission from a gender doctor saying that they've performed more than 10. I think it was vaginoplasties, might have been phalloplasties, but I'm pretty sure vaginoplasties on minors. That's an admission from them themselves.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it does look like they did take away some of the age restrictions, which is something that I don't support. So sure, yeah, I think that's a good thing to point out. Thank you for letting me know that. Cool.
Okay, so your 10 minutes is your turn now.
Cool. Okay. Next, so we already covered. Next, I want to go under some of the philosophical arguments. I think I've painted a clear picture that transgender people are not a danger to other aspects of society. Otherwise, I believe Hayden would have been able to substantiate that. Now, the way we give them treatment, I think there is reasonable discourse and discussion that can be had among that. But the way we treat transgender people is not indicative of transgender ideology being a harmful thing in of itself. Going back, let's explore some of the philosophical aspects. Hayden, what specifically about transgender ideology, not in terms like philosophically, do you think is wrong with it?
Do I think is wrong with it? That there's no such thing as a gender identity. Like a male can't become a woman.
Okay. Do you think that it's like delusion?
You mentioned that in your opening statement. I actually thought that was interesting. I might actually be inclined to say that it's not a delusion, just because I believe a delusion, I'd have to confirm this, but I believe it would be defined as something that's not shared by others. But this ideology is shared by others. However, I do think it's based on falsehood. So I would say that people who are males who think they can become a woman or become a female, that would be false. I acknowledge, like you mentioned earlier, that's not the case with everyone who's trans, right? Some of them acknowledge they can't become the opposite sex, but have like some discomfort. So I would actually say a better way to phrase than me thinking that they're delusional would be that I think they have an extreme overvalued belief.
When you say an extreme what does that mean? I don't understand.
Yeah. So like, for example, let's suppose that I felt uncomfortable with my male body and I wanted to change it so bad as to actually cut off my genitals and get a counterfeit vagina. Okay, that would be an extreme overvalued belief.
I mean, if that increases your quality of life, why is that a bad thing?
Because it doesn't increase your quality of life. Making you completely sterile and a lifelong medical patient is not increasing your quality of life. It doesn't matter what you self-report in a study.
It seems the people who do report otherwise seem to disagree with you overwhelmingly.
The people who would lose absolutely like everything by admitting they were wrong.
Do you have evidence of this big conspiracy of all of them just being liars? Or is it just pure speculation?
I want you to imagine that you, for the last 20 years of your life, told everyone that you were a woman. What would the social cost be of admitting you were wrong, especially if you had gone through the surgeries?
Yeah, that would suck. But then the alternative is like, holy sunk cost fallacy, Batman. Like, do I just keep gambling, just keep doing it, and then it'll be okay? No, of course not. Like, I would suck it up and like have to live with the reality. Like, oh dang, yeah, I was wrong. In fact, the truth is, I'll actually use myself as a case study. I was contemplating bringing this up, but I actually used to think that I was transgender once upon a time. I'm not, but I was born with a birth condition such that I had low testosterone, and I was able to get gender-affirming care as a man, and it was the best decision of my life. Prior to getting that gender-affirming care, in my internal experience, I never felt like a man. I never felt like a woman either, but I just kind of felt, I guess maybe non-binary. But getting the gender-affirming care was the best decision of my life. And then I realized if this is what other people felt, then they should get the same gender affirming care that they need such that their quality of life can be better. Could
I respond to that by chance?
Oh yeah, go for it, man.
Okay. So here's the thing though. When you got testosterone, that was restoring an actual deficiency in your male body, right? It wasn't producing enough testosterone on its own. So that would be akin to someone who gets their cheek blown off in a war by shrapnel getting a skin graft onto their cheek, right? It's actually restoring function, right? Say it allows them to eat better or something like that. Okay, that's restorative treatment. But in the case of someone who's physically healthy, their physical body is healthy, and then they're getting their penis chopped off, that's mutilation. That's not restorative treatment.
Sure, but the thing is, though, this is a very naturalistic fallacy, right? In the sense of just because my body naturally leans towards one thing, doesn't necessarily mean that I may find it useful. For example, if my body naturally produces cancer, right, like then I want to get rid of it. Just because something comes naturally doesn't mean that we want it to stay. And not saying that like having a penis is cancer, but you get the idea. It's just that I feel like it's a very naturalistic fallacy. Going back to the philosophical thing, it just kind of seems like they want something that's not reflective of reality. Is that correct? Why being transgender is like wrong?
Yeah, it's disordered. It's a disorder, right? So it's wanting something that can never become. But I also think that that would probably only apply to a selection of people who are trans. That would be the people who actually believe that like their male can become female. I think probably the wider group would be those with the extreme overvalued belief.
Okay. So like the thing that I'm defending, which is, people who have gender dysphoria who realize they feel like they're born in the wrong body, like that's something you would still say is like should be argued against because it doesn't reflect reality.
I would say it should be psychopathologized. Yes.
Okay. So, but that's because it doesn't reflect reality.
Well, again, that would depend, right? So for those, like I mentioned, for those who actually think they can become a female, well, in that case, yes, there's actually like a delusion about reality. But for the others who know that they can't become the opposite sex, but who nevertheless want to mutilate their bodies, that's the extreme overvalued belief. I wouldn't say that's a delusion.
What about like they say they still want to be addressed as like she, her?
Someone who's male or female wanting to be addressed by she.
They're transgender woman. They want to be, called she, her, ma'am, that. I
would say extreme overvalued belief, not delusion.
When you say, it doesn't feel like a very satisfying answer. I understand you're saying extreme, over satisfied belief, but.
Extremely overvalued belief, yep.
Yeah,
What's not satisfying about that? I'm trying to provide clarity to you as best I can here.
Yeah. Okay. So you just it kind of feels like it's just begging the question, when you say that, they want to get their genitals chopped off and this is just intrinsically bad, even though their quality of life seems to always increase. And then you say they're just liars, right? Like why is it that I'm sorry, I can't remember the term you used. Would it be
extreme
wrong?
Overvalued belief or
extreme overvalued belief? Thank you. Would it be an extreme overvalued belief to say, please refer to me as a woman, despite recognizing that I am a male body person?
Yes.
Why?
So I'll acknowledge there might be like a little dispute as far as like where the line is, but I would include it that being an extreme overvalued belief for sure, because I think the social consequences to that are so high that it doesn't justify any sort of like potential benefits psychologically.
What are those social consequences? And again,
that everyone knows you're like, you're kind of nuts. Like you have an extremely overvalued belief.
Okay, so then, but they're nuts because they're not like reflecting reality. Would you say that?
I would say they're nuts because they're not identifying in accordance. Trying to think. Feel free to take an extra minute because I want to think about this properly.
Yeah, no worries. Usually people call each other nuts if they're not in a mindset.
Okay, I've got it. I would say that they are nuts, but it's not because they necessarily believe something that's false, but because they believe something and something so much and value it so highly that they're sacrificing things that they absolutely shouldn't be. They're sacrificing things that are worth way more to them than what the benefit should be.
So you get to like arbit what people value and don't value enough?
Because like imagine, here would be another example of an extreme overvalued belief that might help explain sort of what it is a little bit better, right? Imagine that I really, really wanted to run a sub 4 minute mile, right? Which you'd have to be in crazy good shape to do. Let's say I really, really wanted to do that. But to do that, I actually go through surgeries to take off fat to where it's the point where I might die because of it, right? That would be an extreme overvalued belief. We'd say that person is nuts. We'd say that person is nuts because they're going to such an extreme measure that the benefits in no way justify the costs.
So when we affirm people's like pronouns, we call them she, her, right? When we affirm their pronouns, why would that be a bad thing?
I think because I think the social costs of doing that are so high. And also the individual cost as well. I think it's harmful to the individual as well, not just like their place in society and what other people do to them. I think it's wrong because there is a right way to be a man, there is a right way to be a woman, and they're foregoing that by having this identity. So I think go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. What is the social cost?
The social cost, everyone's going to think that they're nuts,
but
as they should.
I don't understand when you say nuts. I don't understand because I know you're saying because what you're doing is you're already presupposing the conclusion. Right? You're saying, oh, they're nuts because the ideology is, this like over exemplified thing, right? They have too much of a focus on this one ideology. But what I'm saying is, what is the cost to calling them, girl or whatever gender of their preference?
Okay, so the cost to the person calling them that, or the cost? Okay, I might have just been confused on what you were asking. The cost of the person calling them that, or the cost of the person requesting to be called that?
The cost of them calling or requesting to be called. Yeah, what is the cost of calling them that? Yes.
Okay, so the cost of me calling someone she, her, because that's how that male identifies.
Yes.
Okay, the erosion of social trust.
Of social trust. And so it sounds like it's a deception because they're doing something that like they're not showing the reality of the situation.
So there's the cost to society in the form of us no longer having shared definitions and us not being able to trust each other. And there's the cost to the individual of me affirming a false identity that they have about themselves that can lead to them harming themselves, such as through surgeries or even just through not identifying with their biological sex, because there really is a right way to be a man. And if you think that you want to act or dress like a woman when you're actually male, then that in itself is harmful. And so I wouldn't want to affirm that.
So, okay. I think I get it. So because of this, because you said deception, someone being a male and then identifying as a woman, what is to stop me from making the exact same argument about adoptive parents?
What do you mean?
So like when little Timmy has his birthday, he turned 7 years old and he's adopted and he says, "Thanks, Mom and Dad." Do I go up to little Timmy and say, "Stop affirming delusions"?
No, because the word mother, right? We intrinsically take that to mean the person who's the biological person who produced eggs, right? Which would normally, excluding cases like IVF and donor conception, be the birth mother. But in the case of adoption, right, we have the adopted mother. Why do we use the term sort of interchangeably with the adopted mother? I think the reason there would be because the word mother can have two contexts, which I see where you're going with this, that the word man could have two contexts as well. However, I think the difference is that someone really can function in the social role as mother, whereas you could argue that maybe someone's taking the social role of a woman, a male is, but in reality, I think it's only ever a facade because he can't actually ever perform the true role of a woman, because the reality is that womanhood's not based on how you act. It's based on what you are.
So when you say won't be able to perform the true role of a woman, what does that mean? Like, are we talking about pumping out babies?
Being natural capacity to produce eggs, right? So like a woman.
What
is
if a woman is
eggs.
born without like a uterus?
Is born without a uterus?
Yeah.
She still would have the natural capacity to produce eggs. She wouldn't have the immediate capacity.
So like, why is this like a distinction that we make in terms of like how we live our day-to-day lives?
Why is there a distinction between the sexes?
No. Like, so you say that a transgender woman will never have the any kind of capacity to produce eggs, which I say, okay, yeah, sure, I get that.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you want to define what a woman is literally just on her ability to make eggs and pump out babies, even if she can't actually pump out babies. Something that gets brought up very often is that people like to say that transgender rights advocates are dwindling women down to like a costume or something absurd to that degree. But then I would say that y'all's position is literally just dwindling them down to if they can pump out babies or not.
But it's not though, because you can have a woman with like some genetic defect where she, or because of some accident, doesn't actually end up going to the point of being able to produce eggs, right? So like, for example, a newborn, right? We can tell the difference between the sexes of a newborn, even though they can't produce sperm or eggs immediately. Right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess, am I out of time?
Yeah, you're like 5 minutes past the time.
Oh, crap. Okay, I'll pick this back up when I go again. I apologize.
Okay. Is it okay if I have a couple extra minutes too, or?
For sure.
Sounds good. All right. One of the things you mentioned a while back, so I'm bringing it to like 10 minutes ago here, was the naturalistic fallacy that just because something's natural, it's necessarily good. But when we're talking about the fertility of people being able to actually have kids and the ability to have orgasmic function and the ability to not be a lifelong medical patient needing to dilate your vaginoplasty for the rest of your life, those would all seem like they are net positives, wouldn't they?
Those things in of themselves, if the those negatives come with the positive of their gender affirming care, so I would say that's a necessary component of it. So yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, it's not a good thing that the bad stuff has to happen, but if it has to come with the overall good thing, then so be it. Kind of like how like you don't want to cut people open, but you have to do a surgery, for example.
Okay, what if these patients later on find their fertility troublesome? If they find their fertility troublesome, or their lack of fertility troublesome, would that then indicate to you that that's actually not a positive thing?
They should have been informed about that before undergoing any kind of treatment. So if that comes with it, then so be it. But.
Here's a quote from Daniel Metzger. This was again released in the WPATH files. So this is internal communications within WPATH through their message forum. Daniel Metzger, he's a Canadian endocrinologist. He says, quote, "It's always a good theory that you talk about fertility preservation with a 14-year-old, but I know I'm talking to a blank wall," adding they'd be like, "Ew, kids, baby's gross." Or the usual answer is, "I'm just going to adopt." And then you ask them, well, what does that involve? Like, how much does it cost? "Oh, I thought you just like went to the orphanage and they gave you a baby." Another quote, he goes on to say, this is another quote from Daniel Metzger, "I think now that I follow a lot of kids into their mid-20s, I'm like, oh, the dog isn't doing it for you, is it? They're like, no, I just found this wonderful partner and now want kids and da-da-da. So I think, it just doesn't surprise me." Another prominent WPATH member, again, this is from the WPATH files, Diane Berg, a child psychologist, and she was co-author of the child chapter of WPATH Standards of Care version 8. She chimed in to say, and this is Mia Hughes here, that they wouldn't expect children and young adolescents to grasp the effects of the treatment because, quote, and this is where Diane Berg, co-author of child chapter of Standards of Care version 8 for WPATH, she says, quote, "It is out of their developmental range to understand the extent to which some of these medical interventions are impacting them." So we have internal admissions from gender doctors, and one of whom is a co-author of the child chapter on Standards of Care 8, saying these children are not in the developmental range to understand the extent to which some of these medical interventions are impacting them. They cannot give informed consent. This is based on internal communications, and yet publicly, WPATH and other organizations are saying they can give informed consent. So I would just like to know, which is it?
Yeah, the answer to that, I don't know. I haven't looked at it, so I can't comment on it. It sounds really bad, and I definitely won't disagree with that. But the thing is, though, this doesn't do anything to attack transgender philosophy. This is just saying that the way we're treating it, or like caring for these people, again, assuming all these things, needs to be reevaluated. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't be treating them.
Okay, let's do this then. Are you familiar with body integrity identity disorder?
No.
Okay, so it would be where someone who has a healthy body essentially has another extreme overvalued belief where they want to actually chop off a healthy body part because they identify as an amputee. Are you okay with those surgeries?
Probably not, no.
Probably not. Why?
It would depend on to what level of quality of life it's impacting them. So for example, can you give me one person who's killed themselves over that?
Who's killed themselves? Okay, so hang on. So I can't off the top of my head, but I want to give you a hypothetical here that would be helpful, for me at least. Let's suppose that they did start killing themselves in order to secure these surgeries, because they learned from the trans movement that if you threaten to kill yourself and as a group actually do start killing yourselves, then the doctors will then suddenly give you what you want. Would then that be justification for them to get what they want?
Well, this would be a fantastic reality in the sense of it's so absurd because there's this type of movement has never happened before ever. But if this somehow were to happen in this insane reality, then I would say, I guess go and start doing it, because I would rather have some people who are missing an arm than corpses. So yeah, I'd say go for it.
Okay, at what point in your view do doctors just become order takers to anyone who threatens to kill themselves?
Well, if they're at least 1% of the population facing about a 40% suicide attempt rate, at least that.
Okay, so what you've just told, and I don't mean this offensively, this is going to sound harsh, but maybe consider it later. What you've basically just told every individual who's self-conscious about their body is that if their group starts committing suicide, then they'll get what they want. So now the anorexics are going to look at each other and say, hey, if some of us start killing ourselves, we're going to get liposuction, even though it's medically extremely dangerous for us to get. And all the people with body integrity identity disorder are going to look at each other and they're going to say, hey, we got to learn from the trans people. If we start killing ourselves, we're going to get access to amputations. This is what you're telling every single group. And this is what the medical organizations have told every single group by basing it on suicides. This is what the doctors have told every single group. And this is what society has told every single group by using pronouns and advocating for things like the Equality Act.
No, so this is a total misrepresentation. So people who have anorexia, the reason why we need to treat these people is because they will die because of their own body disorders. However, people who are transgender, they die because they're not able to fulfill they're not able to get their body in alignment with what they see. So the difference is when someone with anorexia does get their body in alignment with what they quote unquote see, they end up dying. When people who are transgender start getting their body in alignment with what they see, they're able to live happy and fulfilling lives. That's the critical difference. So if you want to say, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the point is that you're basing giving medical treatment, extreme body modification procedures on suicide rates.
Yeah, I'm very much a consequentialist.
And so you're telling all these other groups, body integrity identity disorder, anorexia, all the other groups where people have disordered views of their body. You're saying, hey, if your group goes and starts killing each other, or not killing each other, goes and starts killing themselves, or not even necessarily doing that, but just ideating suicide, because there's a major difference between suicidal ideation, which is largely self-reported, or a suicide attempt that's maybe not so serious, and actually killing yourself. If you report suicidal ideation, then you're going to get these treatments.
I don't think I would necessarily just rely on suicide ideations. I would need to actually see people die. I want to see the actual consequences. But what I'm saying is, if you can provide one example of an entire group of people who are taking their own lives just to advance a cause like that of transgender philosophy, not a cause like communism or some political thing, right? Something like that, which that does happen.
I just want to hold on one second. One second. One thing you just said 20 seconds ago is really, really important. You said that you would want to see evidence of them actually killing themselves. Well, I pointed out in my opening statement, I don't know if you remember this, but a study in the UK on children referred to the Gender Identity Development Service, so these would be children who are gender distressed, it found that out of 15,000 patients, including those on the waiting list, only 4 committed suicide from 2010 to 2020. So the alternative, it's not as though the alternative is suicide here, is it?
Were all of them youth that were, I think you said 15,000.
Under 18s. It was under 18s. It was under 18s, 15,000 total for the group.
Yeah, people
who are
Transgender people tend to kill themselves when they're adults. I mean, there's also a pretty big risk. I don't know the specific stats on it, but like I know for a fact that if we're able to treat transgender people in their youth, then they have a better quality of life as adults.
So here's another important thing there. Let's suppose that you're right and that the suicide rate is very high for trans adults. Okay, let's just take that let's agree on that. I mean, I would probably even concede that like the suicide rate for actually completing suicide for trans adults probably higher than the general population for sure. Right? Can we agree on that?
Yeah, easy.
Okay, then let's do that. Then with minors, given the choice between a child desisting by not receiving these medical interventions, just going through puberty, which historically was the natural cure, and then not identifying as trans as an adult, wouldn't that be far preferable to them identifying as trans as an adult by going through all these medical interventions?
Say the question again. I don't understand.
Okay, so let's say that I've got a 6-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And the 6-year-old kid is saying, I identify with the opposite gender. And I then have a choice. I look at the data. I say, okay, well, historically, prior to giving these kids puberty blockers, most of the kids actually desisted and outgrew this identity and had a view that just aligned with their biological sex after going through puberty. So during or after puberty, they would desist. I look at that and then I compare it to the alternative of socially affirming them. They go on puberty blockers, they go on cross-sex hormones, and then as an adult, they're trans-identified. And they have this massively high suicide rate. Isn't one of those options much better than the other?
If that is the case, then I would say yeah, but I feel like it's probably a oversimplification of it. Okay,
so if that was the case, you would say yes. So then shouldn't you be on board to re-psychopathologize?
I mean, in this re-psychopathologize, no, because it's not that being transgender is what it is. That's the problem. It's gender dysphoria.
Okay.
Gender dysphoria is the problem. But being gender dysphoria and transgender, that's not the same thing.
All right. Let's touch on the men and women's spaces. I know we touched on that a little bit. Men and women's sports, are you okay with that? If so, like what ages?
Yeah. So this is something that is going to be guided that I have by philosophy, because I think I need to see more statistics on this. But if we were able to completely eliminate the biological advantages that males do have, and that would probably be something like puberty blockers at sufficient ages, I'd be okay with having transgender women play in women's sports.
Okay, so just the kids who are blocked with the puberty blockers don't go through male puberty?
Yeah.
Okay, are you aware that there is a male advantage prior to puberty in athletics?
To what extent? I think this is like super like minimal at best. And also I know that girls in 5th grade tend to outperform boys in sports. After that, men dominate or boys dominate, but in 5th grade, women.
So I've seen 5th graders play sports, and I would highly disagree with whatever study you're referencing. But I do know that if you look at studies of essentially every kid at every age, you find that there is a male advantage. Now, it exacerbates after puberty, of course, because males get a bunch of testosterone. But even prior to puberty, boys still run faster. They have less body fat percentage. They have more muscle mass. So this idea that there's not a biological advantage prior to puberty is simply untrue. Maybe you disagree with that phrasing, but I've got limited time here, so I would like to keep it moving. One thing that is interesting is okay. So do you think that there should be any option of talk therapy for gender distressed adolescents or youth aimed at resolving the distress that they align with their birth sex or not their birth sex, biological sex?
Yeah. I know. I see what you mean. So like a way of like trying to talk them, I guess, like out of being like trans.
Yeah.
If that were to be shown as effective, then yeah, 100%. But it doesn't seem like conversion therapy or something like that.
Okay. So this is interesting. So you would actually support, so we'll just call it conversion therapy. It's fine, whatever.
Sure.
You would support that talk therapy if it did cause them to align with their birth sex.
Yeah, if it was effective. If it, one, had them align with their birth sex and that they had a solid quality of life, then yeah, I would be okay with that. I think that'd be the best thing.
Okay. Are you saying that on the basis of it being better to align with your biological sex, or just because of like the suicide rates as adults that you think?
I think that in general, life is a lot easier if you're not trans. This is something that every trans person will tell you if you've talk to any. But like, no one who is like legit trans wants to be trans. It's really hard. So if you could live a happy life being cisgender or a happy life being trans, yeah, you probably want to pick being cisgender because it's just easier.
Okay, I'm gonna switch it to your time. I'll just say one last thing before that. It would seem like you would have to be in the re-psychopathologize camp then, because if there is nothing pathological or negative about being trans, then I wouldn't see any reason for there to be talk therapy to try to pull people out of it. That'd be like trying to talk a black person into being white, especially if it's an innate identity. But feel free to respond to that. And then that was 60 minutes. Do you want to do another 10 and 10? I'm good to do that if you want to.
Yeah. I'll do my last little thing here, and then
we'll do another 10. Oh wait, yeah, you do close. So it is your 10, and then that's it.
Okay. Oh yeah,
that's right. Because I started.
Yeah.
So yeah,
true,
you got
true,
10. Go ahead.
True. Thank you. Okay. So the thing that you just said about re-psychopathing, I think that was the word. Whatever.
Re-psychopathologization.
I would disagree. I would agree with that, because the reason why I'm saying you ideally don't want to be trans is because when you have to, either A, you can live life needing to do things with medical assistance, or B, you don't have to. And what I'm saying is if you can live life happily both, either A, cisgender, where you don't need it, or you can live life happily, but you do need that medical assistance, then yeah, you probably want to avoid needing to have the medical assistance. It's just like an unnecessary addition. It's not that being trans is the problem. It's that having to have the medical assistance that ultimately comes with being trans is the problem. But again, it's not a problem being trans. It's just a problem of having to get the stuff that enables you, I guess, to be like transgender or resolve gender dysphoria. So going back, adoptive parents, being parents. So we agree that there is a biological definition of a parent and there is a social definition of a parent, but like we wouldn't say that like an adoptive parent is like deceiving people, right?
I would agree with that characterization. Yes.
Cool. Okay. So if someone is like a transgender woman, you know, we understand like, okay, they're not a biological woman, but like we can socially still treat this person as a woman because they have gender dysphoria. I don't understand why we can't do that.
Okay. So I think something that might be helpful here is I would say that to lie to someone is to deceive them when they expect honest communication. So in the case of a mother saying that this is my son, right? I don't think there's necessarily deception there, because we would actually expect that if someone is the adoptive mother, they would refer to their child as their son. But in the case
that's just like begging the question.
No, but right? What I was going to say is, but in the case of like pronouns, if someone, let's say identified as a woman, and someone says, she is going to bring you the food that you ordered at a restaurant, and then they show up and they see me, I think they're going to be pretty confused, and they'll probably think, you know what, I might have been lied to there.
Sure. And if let's say that I'm a mother and I gave birth to a child, and then I'm at, I don't know, my son has a friend. My friend is adopted and I don't know it. And then I meet the adoptive parent of that kid. Let's say I talk to that mother and I'm like, oh man, childbirth sucks, right? And then the mother's like, actually, I didn't give birth, I adopted. Well, like, could I not say that I feel deceived by this person because she's claiming to be a mother even though she didn't go through the joy of childbirth?
Okay, so here's where I think the distinction would be. I think the distinction would be that we've already as a society kind of accepted the calling adoptive mothers mothers. But I think
we've accepted it.
Yes. So I think the question is, ought we to accept it for the trans identities?
Yeah, and what I'm essentially saying is the exact same line of argumentation that you're using against transgender people can be applied to adoptive parents. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is if it goes for one, it probably should go for the other.
So where I think the difference would be is in the case of referring to a child who is adopted, referring to their mother as the actual mother of the child, not adding a qualifier of like adoptive mother before it. I think that that's actually in the interest of helping children, right? Rather than harming them. But I think in the case of this, right, even if you were to just use preferred pronouns for adults, I think that's harming children because it puts this idea in their head that they could be born in the wrong body, which is simply not true.
So it sounds like the reason why you're okay with, referring to adoptive parents as, whatever, mom, dad, or whatever, is because there is a good, there's a net utility that comes from it in the sense of people are more likely to adopt children and it provides a positive impact, basically. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say, and also that an adoptive mother, I don't know. I was going to say, and also that an adoptive mother can genuinely fulfill sort of the social role of a mother. But I mean, if you look at sort of data on outcomes for adoptive children, it's obviously not as good as if they grow up with their birth parents generally. So I don't know if I could totally say that. That would get sort of into data, but
Sure.
If I didn't answer your question, feel free to ask it again.
No, you're fine. But like, I think like, I'll say, because I'm not going to pin you down on like the statistics on that, and I appreciate you bringing that up. But like, as like a general rule of thumb, the reason why we want to allow adoptive parents to have the title of parents, even though they're not biologically parents, is that there's a generally positive outcome from that, in the sense of we can take care of kids.
Yes, and I would respond to that by saying I think there's a genuinely negative outcome in using preferred pronouns, because it spreads this social contagion to children and minors and adolescents and puts this false idea in their head.
That presupposes
that
the
trans
idea
is negative.
That being trans is bad, but that's again just begging the question. When we see that the total level of, I'll say, suffering seems to be mitigated when we give adoptive parents, the preferred titles that they like to have. And then I would argue as well that suffering seems to be mitigated from all the studies that I cited earlier. Suffering seems to be mitigated when we give people gender affirming care. Now you can argue that like, oh, they're all just lying, but like this is purely speculatory and I'm going to dismiss it as such.
Okay, but you kind of acknowledge that it would be better for a child not to identify as trans when you said that you'd be okay with talk therapy designed to help them reconcile their identity with their actual biological sex. So you kind of acknowledge that we don't want children to be trans.
Yeah, ideally every person is cisgender. I would 100% agree with that, but that's not the reality that we live in.
Okay, but if the ideal is that every person is cisgender, then we should actually stop the practices that are leading to the social contagion where more minors identify as trans, which would include stop celebrating the trans identities, stop medicalizing minors, stop having education programs in schools about the genderbread person, which teaches kids that they might be born in the wrong body. We got to do away with the whole idea.
Incorrect. Sorry. Incorrect. The problem with this is that transgender people will arise no matter what in society. The only question is going to be, are these people able to participate in meaningful ways? So, for example, we have seen throughout all of human history transgender people existing. Now, when they do this, when they exist, what is their quality of life going to be? Do we do things that accept them, or do we do things that don't accept them? So I would say that in terms of like the absolute amount of suffering, even if we socially stigmatize against transgender people, they're still going to exist to some kind of degree. And stigmatizing them only perpetuates their suffering, and this is an intrinsically bad thing. Whereas accepting them, well, ideally people are not trans because, again, ask any trans person, like, do they want to be trans? The answer is no, they don't want to be trans. Accepting them mitigates suffering, even though if it means that there's going to be more transgender people. That's the calculus for it. So with that, if it is hypothetically, Hayden, if it is the case that being transgender and transgender acceptance did result in, I'll say, like overall human flourishing, just better mental outcomes for transgender people, would you be accepting of like transgender rights? So
I would disagree that it ever could be, but let's suppose that you're right. I would still disagree with it on the basis of that it's wrong to lie to people. It's wrong to deceive them. And
adoptive parents?
Adoptive parents?
Yeah.
Let's say that like an adoptive parent deceived their actual child into thinking that they were their biological parent. I actually do think that would be wrong.
But like, let's say though that, we can give like the mom at a birthday party example, right? I'm a mom, someone's a mom. And then I ask them, how's childbirth? And then she's like, yeah, I didn't give birth, I adopted, right? Like,
So again, I would go back to, I think the inclusion of including adoptive mothers without the need always for the qualifier, though it can be needed sometimes. I think that is a net benefit. And I don't think it's deception, because we all kind of accepted that redefinition because we thought there was a good basis for it. So I don't think that it is lying I don't think it would be lying now. You could argue maybe a time ago, maybe it would have been considered before we kind of had this redefinition, but I don't think now it would be lying.
But wouldn't it be, with this kind of mentality, then obviously we can never change any of our definitions in more like meaningful ways, such that if like with transgender people, this just says no, we can't change it because then we'd have to change the definition, and I don't like that.
No, but I think we could. I think we could change definitions if it was good. But this is clearly not.
But but again, in this example, we are presupposing that, or we're just granting that there's an overall mitigation of suffering through transgender rights and advocacy, but you're still against it, even though there's a positive utility to it.
But I don't base my ethical view on only suffering.
But you also said that for adoptive parents, it's fine because one, we've already... Okay, let's say...
I think words can change, but I think they ought to have a good reason for changing.
Yeah, is mitigating suffering not a good reason?
I don't think that it does.
But let's say, again, in this example, it does. Just for the example.
I still wouldn't support it because, again, my ethical view is not only on suffering. I think that can be a good reason. But I don't think it's the only consideration we should make. I think we also, again, as a Christian, I think we ought to consider Exodus, where we're commanded not to lie.
Okay. I would argue that you're just it's just a form of begging the question when you do this. And the only reason why the adoptive parent situation is okay under your framework is because, we've already accepted that there's a social and a biological reality to adoptive parents, but we refuse to make that distinction with women. That's there's a biological and a social reality of being a woman. But that was my time.
Okay. So now moving on to concluding statements. Ethan, you can go ahead and begin yours.
Thank you. So I think this was a really good discussion because it points out statistics and the harm that's caused in reality. I want to say that Hayden did give some interesting things that I was not aware of. For example, like the WPATH files and the cast review. These are things that I need to look into, and I appreciate them being brought up so I can see the validity of them. But when we look at the statistics on the impacts on people in real life, there's unquestionably no doubt about it that the acceptance of transgender people as a philosophy is the better solution. Because if there was statistics that showed that accepting transgender people was dangerous or harmful to society, such that cisgender women were endangered, then Hayden unquestionably would have brought this up. But these statistics simply just don't exist. If it were true that gender-affirming care was not a valid form of treatment and not the overwhelming consensus, Hayden would have been able to bring up more than just the cast review to make his point, while I was able to bring up 3 separate meta-analyses. So we see from the consequential point of view that having transgender rights leads to human flourishing. And because we're able to have happy societies, we can have productive societies. Productive societies, I think we would intuitively agree, are a good thing. So having transgender rights is conducive for that. And lastly, what I want to talk about is the philosophical aspect of it. We have biological realities and we have social constructed things. And for example, the adoptive parent example, it's my favorite example because this is what changed my mind on transgender philosophy. I used to be against transgender rights. A man can't become a woman. What? That's crazy. But then I understood, these are people who have a medical disorder and they feel that they were born in the wrong body. While they cannot physically be put in the correct body, which is tragic, we can treat them as such so that they can live happy, flourishing lives. So is it that they can biologically become women? Of course not. But it is the case that we can treat them in ways such that they can live happy, productive lives, and we socially recognize them as such. I very much am a strong proponent for transgender rights. I'm thankful for the gender-affirming care that I'm able to receive thanks to modern medicine. And I appreciate Hayden for giving me the time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and begin my closing statements. I did have a scripted closing statement, but I'm going to deviate entirely from it. I want to point out that Ethan mentioned a consensus. Well, when you manufacture a consensus by citing your own guidelines over and over, that's not based on evidence. So that's not actually a consensus based on evidence. It's a consensus that was manufactured. He also pointed out that he believes there have always been transgender people throughout time. I'm not sure where he's getting that, but I'll point out there were a whole lot less of them just 15 years ago. And that was good because he even admitted that it would be better for a child to desist than to persist in a trans identity. Furthermore, he mentioned from a consequential point of view that he essentially thinks that transgenderism is good or using preferred pronouns and these types of things are good. Well, when you've got 20 times more people identifying as transgender, that doesn't seem very good to me, especially when they're giving up their fertility at age 9. 9-year-old girls are giving up their fertility. 11-year-old boys are giving up their fertility. Marcy Bowers herself said that none of the adolescent males blocked at Tanner stage 2 are able to achieve orgasm. None. Zero. And if you block puberty at Tanner stage 2, you don't get to Tanner stage 3. You know what happens in Tanner stage 3? In Tanner stage 3, spermatogenesis happens. That's where you actually get mature germ cells to reproduce. And so if you never get to Tanner stage 3, you're never going to be fertile in the first place. One thing I hoped to have gotten to in this debate, but that I just ran out of time and didn't get to, was that WPATH actually has an entire chapter in their latest standards of care on eunuch identities. This is the organization that is giving out standards of care, is an organization that says it's acceptable to be a eunuch and perform nullification surgeries that take away the scrotum, the testicles, and the penis. In the non-binary chapter, they stated that one of the surgeries described in the non-binary chapter, and I kid you not, is penile preserving vaginoplasties. Preserve the penis and get a vaginoplasty. What does this have to do with someone identifying as the opposite sex or gender? Absolutely nothing. This is just extreme body modification surgeries. There's no question about it. There's no other way to put it. Furthermore, on the topic of the non-binary chapter, by the way, I have to mention this as well. This was leaked from, I don't know if it was leaked, but it came out that during a Q&A at a 2022 WPATH conference about some of the surgeries for non-binary individuals, Light and Seal, a British endocrinologist consultant and one of the contributors to the non-binary chapter of WPATH Standards of Care said, quote, "We are doing procedures here where we don't have outcome data. So for a vaginoplasty, for a phalloplasty, there is long-term outcome data of what the pros, the cons, the psychological impact, the sexual functioning impact is. For these newer procedures, we don't have that outcome. So unless you want to go to individual ethics boards in each hospital to get ethics permission to do those surgeries because they're on the edge of the field of medicine, you need to have a mechanism around you to support you. Otherwise, you could be vulnerable." That's the feeling. At that same Q&A, just give me one moment. Let me find it in my notes. Okay, at that same Q&A, someone said, this is a clinician genuinely said this. Okay, this is, and I quote, "I feel like the rate at which people who are non-binary are coming to me and seeking hormone therapy has dramatically increased over the last 3 years. And when I am in a more binary space, I feel fairly confident managing hormones. But in this newer space, I don't feel like as a clinician, I have a lot of expertise in this area to offer them. And so I know that as medical providers and scientists, we really cling to this data. But I will fully just take your ideas, like a Pinterest board or something, because I can't wait for SOC 9 to come out to start helping these folks. So I would love it if the groups who are having lots and lots of patients, if you can just, throw a tweet out there or something saying this is kind of what I do and it might be different for you, but this is a regimen that you might use, or if you wanted to achieve this, you could try this, because I feel like we're all just winging it." Let me read that one more time. Because I feel like we're all just winging it, which is okay. You're winging it too, but maybe we can just wing it together, like publicly in a space where we can share the ideas of how we're winging it. Because I think all of us are now going to go home and thinking it's super important. I still don't know what to do. This is what's happening to children. We have people who are literally saying that they're winging it on non-binary kids with hormones. The idea that a 9-year-old girl and 11-year-old boy can consent to iatrogenic fertility loss is insane. There are only 2 areas of medicine where iatrogenic fertility loss is currently accepted: oncology, which is the treatment of life-threatening cancers, and gender medicine. If you don't get treatment for your life-threatening cancer, you will die. That is not the case for children with gender distress or children who identify as non-binary and trans. And by the way, according to WPATH's own non-binary chapter, 25% to over 50% of people who are identifying with the trans community are non-binary. Over 50% are non-binary. This isn't even just about people thinking they have the wrong brain to match their body. What is a non-binary identity? Can anyone tell me? No one. No one can tell me what a non-binary identity is. Maybe Ethan thinks he could, and maybe that'll be a topic for another time. But with that said, that's my time. Thank you, Ethan, for entertaining this conversation. It was a blast. If people want to find your stuff, why don't you let them know where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me at I'm Officially Ethan.
If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting my channel by shopping my merch or supporting me directly through my website, which should be linked in the description. You can also follow me on social media and subscribe on podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts to stay updated with new content.